Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Post Apoc Horse Talk with your hosts, Galantagious, and my co-host, BG. Say good evening, BG.
Good evening, everybody.
So, I do apologize for the lack of guests tonight. It should come as no great surprise that this time of year is very busy, and folks have other things they want to get on with rather than talk with some dude on the internet. At least I hope it's that anyway. So tonight we have something a bit different and out of the ordinary here. We'll be reading some fan fiction written in by a few, I hope, people who've been watching the show. We'll be starting tonight off with Sanctum, Fort Apoc Sanctum by Dementia Ravenmane. Chapter 1, Only of One, Journey. We're almost there, just hold out a little longer, sis. I stumbled through the snow, sinking to my knees with every step. All around me was white, like a wall that cut me off from the rest of Equestria. Icy flakes bit into my cheeks as they came flying, like fired from a gun by the wind. Yes, Pip-Buck, I knew parts of me were dangerously close to falling off. Thanks for reminding me for the umpteenth time. Before me hovered a tiny marker, my only point of reference in this frozen Tartarus, and my only hope for my sister to make it. Everything was my fault. We should have stayed in the village and become snow farmers like Mum and Dad. But I had to be reckless. I had to accept a Pip-Buck from a shady wanderer. Of course, it had to have contained a treasure map, and of course I dragged my sister into the frozen waste to find said treasure. I was a stupid pony. Way too much heart and not nearly enough head to hold it back. But Glass was smart and kind big sister, and she followed me through fire and ice. She made sure my high-flying plans had stayed grounded and saved my flanks more than I could count. But fate must have gotten fed up with us, and Glass had gotten shot by a raider. Horse apples. Come on, you're going to live. I looked back to Glass, her limp body tucked into Equestria's most ghetto sleigh. Her body seemed to have taken on an even paler blue than her usual, and a frozen red blotch covered her side. I blinked away the tears which burned like fire when they froze on my cheeks. The harness cut into my skin, despite the 3 layers of clothes between it and me. Everything had gone so terribly wrong, and all because I, as usual, had acted out without thinking, and run straight into a raider ambush. Most raiders were after our stuff, and Glass had shown an uncanny ability to negotiate. These raiders were different, though. They had shot first, and then shot some more, and then not even bothered to ask any questions. I trudged forward, ignoring the constant notifications about how dead I should have been by now. Shut up, Pip-Buck, I heard you the first time. This Pip-Buck was an absolute dumpster blizzard. More than half the buttons did absolutely nothing. It itched, and for some reason the only functions that actually worked were the map, the waypoint, and those annoying status alerts, and the text logs. Not that I was entirely ungrateful, the log had done a great job of painting the supposed Stable 273 as the salvation of ponykind. It was probably a load of bull, but unlimited hot water and enormous indoor gardens just seemed too fantastic to ignore. Hopefully they could fix the bullet wounds and acute frostbite too. Only 3 more kilometers. I could do that. I was knee-deep in the snow, and the pony on my sleigh was only 1.5 times my own weight. Now all I needed was to hope that the location on the map was accurate. Then again, the rad meter always showed the value way beyond "you should be glowing goo by now," so most readings from this Pip-Buck were taken with a small mind's worth of salt. Not that I had much of a choice. The snowstorm had eaten all of Equestria except me and my dying sister, so attempting anything else was like letting a blind deaf red roach run your snow farm. I really needed the waypoint to be the only accurate part of my pit buck. I had to make what little hope I had left last, but just another 2 kilometers. It mattered very little when I could only see maybe a meter or two in front of me, but it was an achievement nonetheless. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was doing the right thing. Glass had joined to keep me safe, and that had ended up getting a bullet into her gut. The least I could do was make sure it was past the finish line. The least I could do was make sure she made it past the finish line. Even better, there would be sure to be advanced medical facilities in stable as wondrous as 273. Once we got there, I would have just put in some kind of magical machine, and a couple minutes later she would come out healthier than ever before. Then we could go to the orchards and try all the fruit, and then we could find the communications room, which I'm sure was some high-end stable computer. A smart pony like Glass could figure out how it worked in seconds. Then we could send a message back to our village and relay them to the stable. It was the perfect plan. It was going to save us both. Me, Glass, and our village. Yes, everything was going to be just fine. The final kilometer. Yes, this was a cakewalk. I had no idea why I seemed so down before. I threw a quick glance back and I saw Glass's chest still rise and lower. I was not a fan of the excruciatingly slow pace, but at least she was still alive. Injured could be fixed, dead not so much. The mere sight of the range indicator dropping into the individual meters made my heart skip. And all of a sudden it was like the knee-deep snow had blown away. Everything was falling into place. Glass would live, we would signal our village, and everything would work out in the end. Then in a whole bunch of years, Glass and I would look back on all our adventures and misadventures with some hearty banter. 273 would solve all our issues. It had to. The blanket of whirling snow eventually gave way to a looming dark mass, several times higher than myself and just as wide. As I got closer, details appeared, revealing a huge gear-shaped door. Faded paint spelling out 273 right in the middle of it. So Stable 273 was a real thing after all. The waypoint was correct, all the way down to the door control panel. I trotted up to the weakly glowing green window, almost completely encased in a thick layer of ice and frost. There was a single button not covered in ice, so naturally, I pushed it. Text suddenly flashed onto the monitor, prompting me to verify stable access, whatever that meant. A hatch just opened up below the screen, shattering the ice like nothing but packed snow. 2 cables ejected from inside, then proceeded to flap wildly in the raging storm. I looked at my pit buck, noticing 2 tiny holes in the front, seemingly made for the cables. Glass may have been the smarter of us, but I could still put 2 and 2 together, and before long, the tiny computer was connected to the stable wall. More text scrolled across the monitor, then the cables retracted into the wall, almost taking the pit buck and my leg with it. Come on. I would have jumped on the spot in anticipation, but my legs felt like 4 icicles. Still, we had done it. We'd found stable 273, or at least the massive door of 273 written on it. If only the door would have opened faster. I had a dying sister to save, for crying out loud. As if ponies designing stables had a grudge against those of us in a hurry. The door went through an excruciatingly long sequence before it finally slid and revealed the foyer of stable 273. I ran inside as quick as I could, unable to contain myself. As a matter of fact, I ran a bit too quickly. I tripped over the doorstep and slid my way across the cold concrete floor. Moments later, I got hit in the butt by Glass's sled, sending me sprawling forward even further. Shaken, but intact, I got to my hooves. But a red streak on the floor caught my attention. I quickly brought my hoof to my cheek and then looked at the surprisingly red horseshoe. Injuries were supposed to hurt, right? Weird. The stable door creaked, then slid shut before I had a chance to react. I had no idea if it was supposed to do that, but it felt good to get away from the snow and wind. I squinted in an attempt to see through the dimness around me. If all this was how stables were lit up, stables dwellers must be really scared of the daylight. There only seemed to be one other door, which I assumed led deeper into the bowels of 273. Great. Fewer options meant less chance of getting lost. I did a quick check on Glass, who, thankfully, was still breathing, and moved up against the wall. If luck was somehow on my side, she would stay unconscious until I had her all healed up. Now all I had to do was find the infirmary, or whatever it was called in the stables. How difficult could it be? Stables had maps and signs, or so I at least hoped. By the Windigos, there were so many bodies. More than I could have ever hoped to count. Every bed in the infirmary had one, some even two. They were mummified, dried up into shriveled, flaking husks. Some of them cradled equally mummified foals, as if something had taken their life suddenly and without warning. Despite all of the weird and sometimes downright disturbing things I had seen on my way to this stable, I felt a nausea rise in my throat. An entire stable's worth of ponies did not just go and die like this. Something must have killed them. Dread showered over me, and not only because I had gotten myself and my dying sister locked up inside what turned out to be an underground necropolis. Everything had been looted, every locker and cupboard was completely empty. I ran as fast as my legs allowed me, checking every nook and cranny for supplies, bandages, anything, but all I found was empty containers. No, this was not supposed to happen. I was supposed to save my sister's life. Overmare. I read the text on a door as I pushed it open, revealing a nice-looking office. The walls were covered in photos of ponies playing in the snow, as well as more thermometers and diagrams of snowflakes than I could have ever imagined. The Overmare herself, I presumed, sat with her head resting against the table. A dark stain and a gun next to her told me all I needed to know, except for why. If 273 was, or at least used to be, such a beacon of hope and light, why would any pony want to do something so drastic? Carefully, I attempted to move the deceased mare away from the desk, only to have her body fall apart into dust and bones. Her computer was still active, pulsing with a soft green glow. I pushed one of the two keyboard buttons, and text flared up on the monitor. The text was too garbled to read out, so I picked the first option. It was some kind of audio log, though most of it was so corrupted and compressed that only a select few words are actually legible. Apparently, some pony named Cirrostratus had been tasked with a atmospheric cylinder and phasing out the oxygenator talismans. Whatever any of that meant, I continued to check through the corrupted computer, finding every excuse possible to not have to go back and give Glass the bad news. Maybe if I kept clicking, it would open a secret vault full of supplies, but every option seemed to do less than the last. One beeped angrily when I tried to use it. Another chimed that the Overman's private safe had been unlocked. I quickly searched the office, but I found no sign of any safes, locked or otherwise. The next option simply did nothing, ignoring my commands to activate it. Finally, an option responded with a garbled prompt. Whatever it asked about was unreadable, but one line stood out. Y/N ? Without thinking twice, I accepted. There was no time to waste if I wanted to save my sis. Loud creaking noises exploded throughout the stable, walls and floors vibrating as something came alive within the depths of the steel and concrete bunker. I messed up again. I'm so sorry. I rushed into the now illuminated stable foyer and over to glass. Above me, a synthetic voice blared warnings about atmospheric scanners being offline and a venting process being carried through despite incomplete data. Glass sat up, her head resting against the wall, as if she had held a hoof against her frozen wound. She looked at me, a weak smile plastered over her blackened lips. I was too busy panicking to smile back. Instead, I just pounced her in a tear-filled hug. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have let you come. Glass coughed as I buried my face in her chest, splattering my mane and back with something warm and sticky. What are you talking about, Snowball? She moved my head with her free hoof until our eyes met. I was expecting pain, agony, regret, the kinds of things that dead ponies walking probably felt. My sister just smiled, like we were still at home, lying under our bedsheet way past bedtime, telling stories to each other. We made it, didn't we? This is stable 273, just like we were promised. Her hoof ran through my still thawing mane, just like Mum used to do back home. It's empty. Every pony's dead. There's nothing here. I rested the side of my head against her chest, listening to the weak breaths and erratic heartbeats. I'd gotten my sister killed, and for what? It was all a waste of time. We might as well gone into some random monster's net and kicked its babies. Actually, we had done that on the way here, and it ended pretty successfully. They lied to us. This Pip-Buck, Stable 273, just a big fat lie. But Glass just kept stroking my mane, seemingly not even listening to what I was saying. All I wanted to do was find that bland-fisted wanderer and give him his Pip-Buck back, probably with a stick of dynamite strapped to it. Thinking about it, I would show up his ass too. Well, Glass stopped stroking my mane. I looked up and saw a tear streak down her chin. Who cares? It doesn't invalidate the things we experienced on our way here. Do you remember? She coughed violently, splashing red globs into my mane and face. The ponies at Crystal Lake? What was that? What we did there? A waste of time? Crystal Lake? Every pony, take cover! The ground erupted in a cloud of blue energy, tossing ponies aside and burning their hide. A white suit of power armor moved towards the small village and its meager militia. Bullets pancaked as they struck the almost crystalline hull, not even scratching the glistening surface. The creature, whatever it was, had moved forward slowly, but unwavering. A large black shell ejected from the oversized cannon on its left, sending out a plume of fine powdered snow with it, as another shell started cycling into the chamber. The weapon on the ranger's right side opened fire. Ponies dove behind makeshift barricade as barrage of razor-sharp icicles cut through them, slicing through all but the thickest fortifications like a hot knife through snow. I will blanket Equestria in eternal winter. Your village is but one of many. The booming voice of the ranger seemed only matched by his massive cannon, unleashing another shell that ripped through the barricades and threw ponies around like discarded toys. No matter how much fire the defenders poured on, the Ranger barely seemed to notice. Its glowing blue eyes swept over the fortifications, followed by another barrage of deadly icicles. There is only one absolute in this world. Everything freezes. Allow my sister to break the ice. A crack echoed through the air, followed by an armor's massive cannon shattering like a frozen branch. The defenders, still dazed by the relentless assault, peeked warily over their barricades. Just 100 or so meters away from the armor, perched atop a lone dune of snow, lay a pale blue unicorn, the rusty mane poking out from under her white helmet, almost glowing against the landscape. Above her head hovered a rifle, easily longer than the pony herself. Down to the very same dune came from almost snow-colored earth pony, like shot from a cannon, only visible thanks to her chocolate mane and the orange glass of her ski goggles. She galloped towards the icy ranger, and then leapt into the air and struck its head with all four hooves. There was a resounding thump, like a grenade going off underwater, and the ranger's head evaporated. Is that all? The earth mare's power hooves crackled as she poked the decapitated power armor, leaving it to disintegrate into a fine mist of snow. Well, that was anticlimactic. She turned to the defenders, burst into a wide smile, and then came galloping towards them, and she swiftly scooped at the larger unicorn, who came trotting while casually folding up her massive rifle. Come on, Glass. I want to say hello to the ponies we saved. The earth pony flailed, fruitlessly in her sister's grasp. Hello, I'm Glass. Glass gestured to herself and then her sister. And this is Snowball, my little sister. We would like to rest and resupply at your village if possible. She extended her hoof towards the defending ponies, still wearing her usual calm smile. One of the defenders, a pony completely covered in winter gear, came up and took the hoof. Immediately the remaining defenders lowered their weapons, and whatever tension was left in the air seemed to disappear completely. I'm in charge around here. You can call me Iceberg. Iceberg shook Glass's hoof. I don't know how we can thank you. If it hadn't been for you, that ranger lich would have gotten us all for sure. He pulled away his hood, revealing a weathered crystal stallion. His coat glistened weakly, as if it wanted to shine but had no energy to do it. You can stay for as long as you need. I'll inform the shopkeepers that you may take what you want for free. He nodded and scratched his chin. Within reason, of course. We just did what seemed like the right thing. You're being far too generous. Glass put her sister down, who was quickly started dashing around to greet as many ponies as possible. Most seemed hesitant to shake hooves with the power hoof-wielding earth pony, but the majority were thankful enough to look past the deadly contraptions. You and your sister carry the blessing of the Crystal Princess in your bond. That alone is worthy of praise. Iceberg pulled his geode back on and then turned towards the town. Please make yourself at home. It's the least we can do. They could probably have dealt with the ranger on their own. We just helped them out. I curled up closer to my sister. The temperature was dropping, and an ominous gale seemed to howl from deep within the stable. My breath crystallized in the air before me, which definitely did not happen a few minutes ago. Do you really think so, sis? Glass raised an eyebrow. Besides, that's not the point. He coughed again, splattering more blood against my mane and face. Lifting my head again, she looked into my eyes. Would you have rather have stayed home and fought an undead steel ranger made out of ice? That was an adventure, short as it was. I dropped my head back to her chest, crying even more. And what about the sunrise over the frozen forest? The sunrise? Come on, just a little more, sis. You can do it. Snowball jumped up and down excitedly, urging her sister to hurry up. You're gonna miss it. Glass reached over the ridge with a hoof, then heaved herself over the edge and onto the plateau. Through the darkness, she could see a seemingly endless forest stretch across the land. Every tree was like a pink cushion of ice stabbing against the very landscape with its many thorns. Okay, what are we here for? Glass sat down on the bare rock, her eyes glazing over before the valley before her. It was a beautiful in its outlandishness, but hardly the view Snowball had made it out to be. It doesn't seem all that. A blinding light struck Glass, almost making her fall backwards in surprise. On the opposite end of the valley, the mountains parted, the cloud covered just enough for the first rays of dawn, to make their way down. The light swept across the forest, reflecting off the frozen trees, filling the valley in a sea of sparkling lights. Glass found herself at a loss for words, too busy trying to control the tears streaming down her face. Absolutely beautiful. It was like staring into infinity, or at least what she imagined infinity to look like. See, I told you it'd be worth it. Snowball looked at her sister, her eyes red with tears. Imagine when we get to 273, we can relay the village through here. They can all get to see the sunrise. She started prancing around, then tackled Glass into a hug. The two rolled around in the snow, laughing uncontrollably. You're right, sis. Glass sat back up, looking out across the valley as the sparkling dimmed. We should definitely do that once we get to 273. Yeah, it was a beautiful sunrise. I stifled a sniffle, my nose stinging from the cool air. The lights were starting to flicker ever so slightly, as if the cold was sucking their energy, just like it sucked the life out of me and my Glass. But we'll never be able to show any pony else. What's the worth if you can't share it with any pony? I tried to stand up. Take a walk, do anything to keep myself warm. My legs aren't working. A lump had built up in my throat, almost choking my words. We're going to die here, aren't we? Well. Glass's smile wavered, just barely enough for me to notice. I think it was worth to see that sunrise, and it was all thanks to you. Her breathing was even more shallow and her heartbeats barely noticeable. Why don't you... She coughed again, even further staining me and the floor red. Why don't you tell me about something you remember? Wasn't there anything we did on our way here that you'll never forget? Well, I coughed and then instinctively drew a breath that burnt my lungs. It it was like breathing icicles. There was that sled chase with the avalanche. That was really cool. The smallest hint of a smirk crept across my face. It seemed to chase off the incoming cold, even if it only lasted for a moment. Yeah, I guess the sled chase was pretty intense. This is amazing! Snowball laughed as the sled sped through the forest, spraying snow behind it in an enormous plume. A bullet ricocheted off the floor next to her, and then quickly pulled back down beneath cover. Hey, stop being such killjoys! She took one look at the power hooves, then shook her head and detached them. More bullets passed overhead, several also bouncing against the metal sheet that she hid behind. She looked to Glass, crouched down next to her. The unicorn was working on assembling her oversized rifle. Despite the unadulterated chaos going on around them, she worked with remarkable calmness. I'd hate to break up tea time, but I'm gonna need you to take out those raiders. The one piloting the sled, a griffin covered in extremely thick fur and equally thick plumage, threw Snowball an urgent glare. He adjusted his goggles and then peeked up to avoid a tree jutting up from the snow. We're going to need the slope for ourselves to keep up with the avalanche. A bullet pinged off his helmet, and then he quickly dropped to his stomach. Just one moment, Slippy. Glass started adjusting her scope, slowly manipulating the small screws that held it in place. Apparently it was not going how she wanted, as she furrowed her brow and started over again. Hey, I have an idea. Snowball strapped her power hooves back on and slammed them together. They discharged from each other with a thump, knocking her hooves away from each other. Slippy, throw me. She crawled over to the cowering griffin, stray bullets plinking against her helmet. The griffin just looked at her, dumbfounded. What? He shook his head as if to see he had gotten something in his ears. Are you out of your mind, lady? I'm not going to throw you. He quickly looked up and then swerved the sled to avoid a jagged rock. A cluster of shotgun pellets ricocheted off the back of his sled, spraying pellets all over us like a swarm of angry bees. Slippy gave Snowball a sour look and inside. Fine, but don't have your sister blame me when this all goes terribly wrong. As long as there was a gap in the hail of bullets from the other sled, as soon as there was a gap in the hail of bullets from the other sled, Slippy grabbed Snowball, stood up, and heaved her at their assailants with all his strength. This is even more amazing! Snowball looked down as she sailed over the rushing snow. At the shocked looks of the raiders, Glass looked up with a highly unamused glare, just adjusting the scope on her rifle. Her power hooves crackled together as she slammed them together, activating them. Who called for a party crasher? Snowball landed with all four hooves on the back of one raider, completely eviscerating his back and stomach. Of the remaining three raiders, two of them were quick to lunge at her, dropping their rifles in favor of jagged climbing axes. In one motion, she threw her hooves out, blasting the raiders off the sled. Their bodies rolled in the snow, but were quickly consumed by the incoming tidal wave of snow. You monster! The last raider reared up behind Snowball, brandishing a pair of very spiky snowshoes. Just as she was about to stomp down, her head turned into a fine red mist, repainting the entire inside of the sled. Snowball looked at the still rearing body as it slumped over, then at her sister. Glass had a rifle resting against the edge of the sled, smoke trailing from the muzzle. She tucked the rifle away and then grabbed Snowball with her magic and lifted her back onto the sled. Moments later, the raider sled smashed into a tree, flipped over, and disappeared under the avalanche. Well, I guess it worked. Glass looked at Snowball, bearing her usual small smile. She started dismantling her rifle, not taking her eyes off her sister. Just give me a warning before you do it again. Snowball nodded in reply, kicking off her power hooves and stashing them in her saddlebags. You two are absolutely insane. Slippy stood back up, grasping the sled's wheels as he looked at the two sisters, then shook his head and sighed. But you're pretty good at fighting, I'll give you that. Now let's get out of this avalanche. Wasn't that worth it? Glass gave me a meaning look. I just nodded weakly, and pieces started falling in place in my head. My sister coughed again, much more weakly this time. Red saliva trickled from the corner of her mouth, like a gaping wound spreading from her face. It was crazy dangerous, and you had fun. Was that worthless? Somehow she kept the same encouraging smile, despite barely managing to stay conscious. Well, I bit my lip. It was completely dumb, like it was biting someone else's lip. Yeah, that was kind of worth it. I coughed again, drawing a lungful of searingly cold air. This was bad on all levels, but there was only so much I could do about it when I had lost all feelings in my legs. What are you trying to say, sis? Our eyes met each other, and I felt tears push their way out. I'm saying, Snowball. Glass took a strained breath, barely inflating her chest. Who cares that there wasn't any goal? Just look at all the things that we experienced together. The lich, the sunrise, the sled, all those other crazy things we did on our way here. That's more than I expected to experience in my entire life before you got that pit bug. She stroked my mane again, her hoof resting on my head more than stroking it. Wasn't the adventure alone worth it? I guess. I snuggled up to her even more, desperately trying to conserve what little heat I had left. My mind raced, or at least attempted to race, at the idea that Glass seemed okay with dying. It was so unlike anything I'd ever heard from her before. No matter how hard I tried to make sense of it, the cold just made me tired, and all I wanted to do was take a nice, long nap. You're right, it was worth it. Glass remained quiet, her chest stilling. I wanted to cry with her and keep her with me, but I was too tired. Maybe I could dream about our adventures together. And that was Fall of Equestria Sanctum by Dementia, Ravenmane. We'll be taking a short break after this one to, one, rest my throat, because reading all of that in one take is going to hurt my neck a lot. I'll be back shortly with more stories. Alright, I said the break would be pretty short, and we're back. Before we continue tonight with our next story, if anyone in the chat has a suggestion for a third story for tonight, please feel free to suggest it in the chat. BG will keep track of that and find it if you haven't already posted a link. I will read anything as long as it isn't too lewd.
Right. And yeah, I would much appreciate if you either directly share the link or if they are on, FimFiction, where they can be more easily found than some random paste bin.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Film and fiction links would be ideal. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to do that. And to Mr. Darkseeker, yeah, I think it's just magic. I don't know how I managed to speak with few mistakes. I don't know what that means, Seeker.
That fiction title does seem familiar. It rings a bell. Let me just have a look.
I'm pretty sure that's just like a straight up clop fic. I would ideally want to keep any material
yeah.
in FOE and not really like clop fic stuff, ideally. Because frankly, my voice may be luscious to listen to, but I'm not going to do the loot stuff, okay?
Yeah, we'd really like to keep it with serious stories, revolving around a theme or some sort of development with the characters. We would much. It's that very long noir fanfic he writes. Well, ideally, we would want something that we can, finish
What a
within like half an
coincidence!
hour or.
What a coincidence, Overlord Kane. That's actually the next story up tonight.
Nice.
But anyway, while you in the chat mull this over and perhaps come up with something that you would like me to read, let's get started on our next fic tonight. Fallout Equestria, A Beautiful Thing by Focait. Chapter 1. A Beautiful Thing. Love is a beautiful thing. Love is connection. It's unity. Love is finding some pony you can truly reach out and touch in a meaningful way. It's what Deddy and I have had ever since we met. She's been my life as long as I can remember, and she always will be. I am the pony I am today because of her love and her guidance. Do you see those two eastward boundary meters out? An odd couple traveling alone? How adorable. She cooed, zeroing out her scope. I see them, dear. Do you want to go first, or if you would be so kind, may I? Go ahead, sweet thing, you've earned it. Her generosity is so refreshing in a wasteland that always takes. Crack! Her shot sounded like an echo to mine, filling the canyon and ripping through it. Wonderful shot as always, Daddy. I cycled my bolt, hearing Deadeye do the same in tandem. You too, honey. You need any supplies? Nah, I think we ought to let the scavengers have them. She brushed a lock of her golden mane out of her eye. Want to bait them? Not this time. I am a merciful goddess today. She let out a soft giggle. Our territory was ripe with looters, eager to pick through and clean our eager to pick clean our marks. So willing to throw themselves in front of our rifles in the hopes that we'll miss. Daddy never did, of course, not on purpose. But sometimes we'd let them have a few of our spoils to keep them coming back, and they always did. Love is learning. It's something you can practice every moment of every day. Love is knowing that you're doing the best you possibly can do, or at least you're always striving to get better. Run out to the southwest, about 400 meters. Crack. Jittery little. I should have hit her. She was out of cover for so long. Then I tutted softly. Dear, you have to adjust for windage. I'd been impatient. I hadn't looked for the wind. It wasn't usually a factor in this particular slice of the wastes, but there was a tattered flag on a wrecked wagon, flapping strong northeast. The runner peeked her head from the wreckage of a caravan for too long. But I'm patient. I want to show Daddy that I'm listening to her advice. She doesn't take the shot, so I know she's waiting for me to take the chance. The mare decided to take her chance. She started galloping again. To where? Our vantage point gives us a clear view. Crack. Her forelegs disappeared in a gorgeous red spray. She skidded for a good few feet before coming to a rest, eliciting a giggle from Daddy. There you go. You had your lead down. You just weren't watchful enough for the winds. Her voice is lovely to listen to, even be chided by. She should have been a slinger if she wasn't so much a beautiful marksmare. Once I saw her make a shot straight center of mass from 2 kilometers away. I'll get the next one. Crack. But Daddy got the final tally this time. Love is passion. It's spirit. It's ending your day knowing the job is done, and done perfectly. You're getting better at this. She flopped back on the mattress, her fur glistening with sweat. She gave me a pleased grin as her flowing golden mane covered the bed's pillow. I've got a good teacher. I curled up beside her, resting a muzzle under her chin. Her pink fur is soft, like her voice and demeanor. She's a joy to behold, a real treat. That was a gorgeous shot earlier, by the way. She's kind, encouraging. I'll make a sniper out of you yet. It had been another productive day. An Enclave scout had flown too close to the metaphorical sun. I hit her through a cloud, expertly predicting the little birdie's path as she tried to run away. Nobody could have made that shot, not without Daddy's guidance. I'll be as good as you one day. I gingerly kissed her lips. She's so warm. I'm getting really good. I'm cocky too, it seems. Come on, you're not done yet. She ran a hoof through my sweat-matted mane, pushing me down again. I didn't mind giving so often, not when she gave me so much. Love is patience. It's waiting for the perfect moment. Love is knowing that it's not that perfect moment now. You'll get there soon. Ping! A bullet pinged off the low cover of my perch. All right. Sorry about that. I was being called for a moment there. Let's get back into it. He's getting closer, Daddy. I couldn't get an angle on. The angle was too steep. To get a shot at one another, one of us would have to peek out first, and he knew about us before we knew about him. Not close enough. Ping! Another shot bounced, this time above my head. Daddy didn't have an angle on him either. We were far away for this post, but we kept close via radio. I could even still see her through my scope of my rifle, resting on her exposed perch. She lived dangerously. She could afford to. She was a master. She wasn't taking the shot for a reason, though. She was testing me. You can do this, dear. Come on, you don't need me. But I did, just like she needed me. He was hidden under one of the many carriage husks on the roadway. There was quite a bit of cover from us, but that was the way we liked it, with a bit of challenge. Not that we were never much danger from our nest. I knew what she had wanted to do. I waited, stayed perfectly still. I was patient. I'd been trained by the best, and he hadn't. How are you doing on ammunition, dear? I might need to loot this mark once I tally him. You've got to ration yourself better. When will you learn? I was always learning, just some things are easier than others. I'm sorry, Daddy. Hearing that disappointment in her voice hurt so much. Ping, ping, ping. That made 5. I took a chance and nosed out at the perfect moment. He was reloading, and I had lulled him into a false sense of security. Crack! And just like that, he was gone. Took you long enough. He was an easy mark. Another tut of disappointment. It stung, but I knew she did it because she wanted me to be better. Because I knew I could be. Love is trying. It's perseverance. Even when you know you're facing impossible odds. It's putting yourself up to the test every day and coming out stronger. Whap! A small round dug into the dirt beside me while I picked the most recent mark clean. Daddy did this now and then. It kept me on my hooves. It made me cautious like I ought to be. The first shot always was a warning shot, except when it wasn't. It was clever of her. It kept me paranoid. I dragged my mark behind a burnt-out wagon. His rifle was clean, but it wasn't immaculate like mine or Daddy's. It would still suffice. Of course, for what I needed it for at least. It was also loaded. I suppose he wasn't reloading. Just stupid. Untrained. Crack. I fired a shot back at her perch. Wide, of course. I didn't want to hit her. Not like she'd let me if I were ungrateful enough to try. Whap! Another slug ricocheted off the wagon and skittered into the road. She used 22s to test me. She used to use rubber bullets, but I graduated past those long ago. She was so proud. After picking my mark clean of all his spare rounds and supplies, I edged out and fired another shot before starting my escape back to the perch. From car to car I dashed, every now and then spiraling around towards her nest. I was small, so there was even more cover for me than my usual mark. He still hit me, of course. I have felt the slug bite into my left hind, and that was enough to floor me mid-sprint. She always hit her mark. She was always so much better than I. Another scar on my hind leg and another bruise on my chin. But I'd make it further than I'd gone before. I'd gone a good haul too. But as the winner of our little bout, Daddy's still got the lion's share of my picks. I didn't mind though. She earned it fair and square. Love is happiness. It's joy. Love is having a great time with what you're doing and who you're doing it with. This is my favorite post. We were right behind each other. Sorry, right beside each other. Getting a bit frisky there. I could hear her soft, controlled breaths. She could hear mine. We were in tune with each other. The caravan decided to walk our little slice of wasteland. 8 marks just waiting to be picked. They must have not had any idea of what kind of place they'd trotted themselves into. Not a single weapon they were carrying could touch us from so far. Ka-crack! Another 2 marks down. Ka-crack! The banded targets scattered for cover, their number now halved, and terror coursing through them. Made them panic, which made it easier to pick. One of them made a break for it, just at the wrong time, exposing that wonderfully meaty side to our rifles. Crack! I left her writhing in the middle of the freeway with a hoof-sized hole in her belly. 2 of her compatriots tried to be brave. One tried to run to her, revealing himself to us. The other laid down some rather pitiful covering fire. Crack! Not that she posed much of a risk for us from a kilometre away. We let the hero make it halfway before, crack, Daddy popped his skull like a cherry. His headless body slid almost to our bait, stopping just short of her face. Bet she's not having a very good day, Daddy said in his sing-song voice. The last one seemed to realize the futility of our bait situation. He ran, and ran fast. Should we? I asked, tracking the cowardly buck as he retreated down the road. I could practically hear the smile on Daddy's face. Let him run. Daddy and I peppered the dirt around his hooves for fun as he disappeared into the horizon, and we let the buzzards have their way with the bait now that we were done with her. I still had her to the tallies after all. It was still my pick. Our pick. Love is triumph. It's victory. Love is coming out above the rest with that special sun pony leading you. 34 and 22, Daddy and I, respectively. At this rest, at least, we always move out after enough tallies, before things get too hot and the locals get too antsy, and it seemed it was about time to find a new place. Another 2 travelers, eh? Where are you going? I recognized the guide as we walked in town. I'd shot at him before. We're heading out east. We're going to find a new life for ourselves out there. He gave my cheek a little kiss. Oof, might want to not head out that way, not from here. Take you right through Death Valley. Death Valley? Daddy asked the guide instantly. Yeah, it's a highway in the canyon a couple kilometers out, with some snipers perched on it somewhere. No idea where. They keep changing it up. It's like a massacre every time a caravan comes through. This was my favorite part. Hearing them talk about us. We'd go to the nearest town just to hear about this, even if it took us out of our way. We gave him a pound, full of faux worry. Oh, well, I think we'll manage. We've been through a lot worse than a couple of snipers, haven't we, sweetheart? Mm-hmm. I nodded under her chin, with an affection much more genuine than her concerted look on her face. She smiled wonderful, like gunpowder and sweat. Much of the wasteland had a similar scent, but nothing smelled quite as lovely as she did. It's your funeral, ma'am. Just saying. You two won't be the first when they get you in their sights. It'll take longer, but it'll be a hell of a lot safer going around. We'll be careful. She tugged me closer, her warm fur against me. We've got each other, after all. Always will, too. I smiled as we trotted together down the road, side by side. Where do you want to set up next, Daddy? I'll know it when we find it, but for now, let's find a place to stay for a while. I want to have a bit more fun before we go. She winked and nudged her flank against mine. And I was ever so happy to oblige her. We had time for a victory lap. Love is dependable. It's familiar. It's something you know you can rely on. Something that stays the same even through the change around it. The general store we restocked the next morning was delightfully barren, and the shopkeeper was very keen to complain about how those snipers were quite literally killing her supply lines. If only she had known who was standing in front of her. We waved to the guard as he trotted past, Daddy leading the way out the gate. I don't know what I'd do without her. We've been through nest after nest, scored mark after mark, and I couldn't have done it or continue to do it without Daddy's guidance. We have something good together, a beautiful thing called love. And that has been Lord Equestria, A Beautiful Thing by Focait. So, I hope everyone has enjoyed this. I'll be going for another short break for pizza. And hopefully by the time I get back, you will have found something you'd like me to read. Though I hope you keep to the rules as Lisa said earlier. And we're back. Thank you for being so patient. We'll continue with one more story, and we'll probably end up calling it for the night. I apologize for it being so short. Oh, is that a suggestion? 1 minute.
Yes, a perfectly good fan fiction suggestion. So
Guess we'll go for this one then. Thank you, Mr. Overlord Kane. We will be using this one tonight. So, next story is Vena Cava by TheWanderingZebra. Chapter 1, Vena Cava. A lone griffin, shrouded in a cloak and hood, wandered aimlessly through the city ruins with only a metal bat covered in bolts. Hyena-like laugh escaped from her beak, but she continued forward. Buildings had either fallen over or eroded enough to develop gaping holes in their walls. Food wrappers, magazines, and loose pre-war posters littered the ground. She saw no other signs of life. She laughed once more, and paused. It was oppressively quiet. Gunshots rang out, causing the griffin to grow alert. She relaxed, however, and tried to resume her walk. But another series of gunshots made her look up at a tower. Her wings flapped and she flew towards it. The tower was 3 stories high, enough for the griffin to look down at the surrounding area with ease. She perched herself on the roof's edge. The griffin glanced down, saw an earth pony filly, round her early teens, chained against a wall within a basketball court. The other side revealed a group of crudely armored ponies. Raiders. One of them levitated a rifle and shot at the filly's direction. She managed to dodge in time, her chain long enough to do so. She shot them a scornful glare. "Go on, squirm," one of the raiders said as he fired another round. "I can keep doing this all day." The griffin kept her eyes on the scene. She briefly turned away, glancing at the filly once more, specifically the leather collar she wore. The griffin descended with little hesitation, landing on all fours. She was behind the raiders, who were momentarily caught off guard before pulling out their weapons. A raider levitated a sharpened pool cue near the griffin. "Who the fuck are you?" Silence. "Who are you?" "Where did you buy her?" The griffin heaved, her voice a dry croak. The raider sneered, her spear inching closer to the griffin. "Fuck off! She's our toy. Go find your own." The griffin took one step towards the raider and shouted, "Kill this bitch!" The raider lunged her weapon in a flash at the griffin, who quickly caught it, broke off the tip, and plunged it into the raider's eye. A bloody screech filled the sky. The raider fell to the ground, her forehoof desperate to cover her face. The other raiders took action. A pair fired at the griffin with their pipe guns. A third charged forth with a crowbar in his teeth. The griffin flew out the way, though a bullet struck her in the left foreleg. She growled at the pain and lunged towards the crowbar-wielding raider, her arm reaching out to grab the raider's neck. His eyes widened. It was all too late to respond as the griffin's talons pierced through his exposed flesh. He screeched out, dropping his crowbar as the griffin lifted him up. The griffin swung the raider around, just in time as the other two fired. Her pony shield took a few shots before the other raider stopped and began to circle the griffin. She tossed the dead raider aside and drew her bat, who flew near the ground level, towards one of the raiders. The first pipe gun raider fired at the griffin. A few shots grazed the griffin's chest, but she continued on, the tip of her bat scraping against the ground with sparks as she swung upwards at the raider's chin. The raider's neck snapped at the impact and fell limp. A shiver ran across the last raider's body. He pulled the trigger of his gun. He received only clicks. He tossed the weapon away in frustration and began to make a run for it. The griffin took notice and flew in front of him, grabbing hold of one of his hind legs. He threw the raider to the ground as he kicked and screamed. The griffin yelled as he dragged him through the stone court, and then tossed him towards a brick wall. He whimpered and did nothing as the griffin used both claws to twist his leg in a wet crunch. The shock alone made him lose consciousness. "You bitch!" The griffin turned around and noticed the same raider who had used the pool cue. "You'll fucking pay for this!" The raider yelled as the blood streamed from her face. She levitated a broken pool cue and took charge at the griffin. The griffin laughed as she unholstered her bat, and readied a downward swing for the raider. The slave filly, however, bolted between the griffin and the raider, and shortly after the raider fell. The griffin saw the chain from the filly's collar near the raider. She briefly looked behind her to find the filly nearly choking. The raider stood up as she tried to levitate back her weapon, only for the griffin to stomp on it. Okay, the raider shouted, her body shaking. "We don't remember where we got this little shit." The griffin kicked the pull cue and walked closer to the raider. She began to unholster her bat. "She's yours now. You've won. You fucking won. Don't do this," the raider begged. The griffin swung her bat downward at the raider, resulting in a loud crunch and a clang against the ground. She swung again, and again, and again, until the raider became a still body, blood pooling beneath her. Silence filled the air, and the griffin looked back at the filly and saw her catching her breath. The griffin looked at her wounds and proceeded to search around the corpses of the slain foes. There was little to find at first, but eventually one of the bodies had what she was looking for, a healing potion. Meanwhile, the filly caught her breath, staring in awe at the hooded griffin. "Hey!" the filly said, causing the griffin to turn in her direction. She swallowed but gave a smile. That was pretty awesome." The griffin paused and cocked her head at the filly. "Name's Scrap?" the filly said with a drawl. "You killed them to save me?" The griffin laughed before drinking her potion, then walked over to the filly. Scrap flinched a bit before seeing the savior reach for her collar with a single talon and slice it off. Scrap touched her freed neck. The griffin turned to Scrap. "You're a slave. You remember where they sold you?" Scrap nodded. Half an hour passed. The two had been on the move through the quiet ruins. They had passed over a fallen stoplight. After they had passed over a fallen stoplight, Scrap spoke. "Really? What's your name?" Her savior said nothing. The hood had obscured the griffin's expressions, and Scrap was left only to guess at the griffin's reaction. When the Griffin replied, it was only a dry chuckle. "You've been doing that a lot," Scrap pouted. "Is there something funny about me?" The laughter came to an end. "No." Scrap sighed and continued to trot, occasionally watching the ground for any broken glass or rad roaches. "Vena," the Griffin muttered. "Huh?" Scrap blinked. "Oh, your name? That's a pretty cool name." Vena didn't respond. Scrap kept her pace, remaining in front of Vena, and looked back. "You know, I've never seen a Griffin who could fight raiders without a gun," she said as she stared at the baseball bat holstered on Vena's back. Spotting the word Cava scratched into it. "He's all I need," Vena said and gestured to her bat. "He?" "Cava. I think of him as a he. He's been with me for a while now." Scrap could feel Vena's glare. "You can't have him," Vena said. "Oh, no." Scrap shook her head. "I wouldn't be thinking of it. Um, him. Besides, it makes you look like the sword mare. Just, using a bat instead of a sword." "Sword mare?" "Comic book I used to read. Mare with a big sword fighting monsters and such." Vena shook her head. "Is there anything you enjoy in your spare time?" Scrap asked. No response. "Do you want to find something fun?" More silence. "Or what about?" "You haven't been asleep for that long, then," Vena said with a raised eyebrow. "Uh-huh, how would you know?" Scrap blinked. "Most slaves don't fight back. You did. And now you're talking about happy things. Either you weren't broken in, yet, or you're that tough." Scrap looked down at the ground, but cracked a soft smile. "Yeah, not for that long. I've been on my own for a while now, occasionally traveling with others," she sighed. "These are these nice caravanners I was with, but we got ambushed by slavers." Vena kept silent. "And that's not fair," Scrap said with her teeth grit. "Who are those slaves that think they can just lash a collar and feel that they ain't worth nothing? That they feel they ain't nothing. Feel there ain't nothing wrong if my brain will work with me tonight. It's ponies like them that are the reason this place is still a wasteland, and I won't let them get away with it. Like DJ Pone 3 says, fight the good fight, and that's what we'll do." Vena laughed softly. You really do think it's funny?" Scrap asked, frowning. "No," Vena coughed. "You don't want to let the wasteland kill you. Maybe you can be like me one day. I respect that." "Really?" Scrap beamed and began to laugh. "I don't think that I'd be able to be as good a fighter as you are." For a brief moment Scrap could see Vena's silver eyes narrow as she cracked a smirk. "It's a start," Vena said. "All that matters is your will to fight." A smile crept over Scrap's muzzle. She looked away from Vena and towards the grey clouded sky. "That, yeah," Scrap said. "I do want to be like you, so will you like me?" "Longer," Vena laughed. "It was more blood, more rust, more death. Years." "How'd you become free?" Vena tapped Cava's handle as she spoke. "A pit. Slaves would fight to the death. Enough kills, and you're free. I'm one of them." "That doesn't sound good, being made to fight other slaves." "It was me or them," Vena said and gripped her cloak tightly, but eventually loosened her hold. "So," Scrap gulped, "now you want to have those slavers face justice?" "I just want them dead." "I Scrap said, biting her lip. I've never killed before. Wildlife, sure, but ponies? She took a deep breath before continuing. I know it ain't pretty, but if I want to save folks, I'm gonna have to. Vena only sighed. All right, Scrap said and stomped on the ground. It'll be hard to fight them slavers alone. You could die. I know, Scrap said when it came to a stop. But you said it yourself, it's a start, even if I don't, make it. All that matters is that I have the will to fight, and I can't run and hide from the wasteland no more. Silence filled the air between the two. Another laugh escaped Vena before she responded. You mean it? Of course. Vena squared her shoulders and turned away from Scrap. Let's keep going. So this is it? Vena asked. They stood in front of a two-story building with a faded sign, calling it Loose Ends. Windows that had been shattered and boarded with plywood, its walls once clean and pure, were riddled with explicit graffiti. Yeah, this is the place, Scrap said and nodded. There's around a dozen of them. Vena scanned the store. The front entrance was heavily barricaded. The rest of it, however, wasn't given the same amount of protection. Just on the left edge of the building there was a dormant air conditioning machine with an air duct. Come on, Vena said, and began to fly towards it. Hey, Scrap shouted, I can't fly. Vena rolled her eyes and flew back towards Scrap, offering her back to the filly. Scrap climbed up, doing her best to put some distance between herself and Vena's weapon. When they arrived, Vena began to check the duck's size. Enough, it turned out, to fit them both. She tore out the vent lid and tossed the twisted metal aside. They crawled into the vent, Vena in the lead. Scrap felt dumb and clumsy behind Vena, her hooves making so much more noise than Vena's near-slime feline paws and eagle talons. Each step rattled the metal beneath them. Soon enough, Vena stopped moving and huddled at the edge of the grate that looked down into a room. Voices drifted upward. You're right. Grease is starting to get soft with the merchandise. Yeah, but what can we do? He's the boss's brat. So? Trim should stop being his pa and fuck him over until he's a proper slaver. Vena's laugh echoed through the vents. Vena, Scrap whispered, what are you doing? Vena placed her claw against her beak and took heavy breaths through her nostrils. Her free claw formed into a fist and hit her head. You hear that? One of the slavers asked. Yeah, the other said, drawing a shotgun. Vena, after calming down, stared at Scrap, who finally got Vena's scarred grey feathered face. Scrap blinked and stepped back as Vena broke the grate off. Vena dropped down into the room and lunged at the slaver with the shotgun, ripping it out of his levitational grasp and clawing at his throat. The slaver's partner tried to bring out a walkie-talkie, but Vena quickly ripped through her captive's throat, and tossed his body away before she lunged at the next slaver with Cava drawn. The last slaver dodged in time, but wound up dropping his walkie-talkie. Swearing, he glanced at the tossed-aside shotgun and made a run for it. Scrap, after jumping down, beat him to it and snapped the shotgun away in her mouth. Her eyes widened as she aimed the gun at the slaver, and instantly pulled the trigger. The blast hit him in the chest as he slammed hard against the wall. His body fell, leaving a trail of blood. Vena holstered Cava and chuckled again before turning to Scrap. First kill, right? Scrap groaned, having fallen from the impact. She had dropped her shotgun and massaging her jaw with her hoof. Her breathing increased as she saw the remains of the slaver. Crap, She swallowed hard to keep herself from vomiting. Vena watching her with her wide eyes. They probably heard us. I just blew our cover, didn't I? Wouldn't matter. They're all going to die soon anyway, Vena said with a shrug. Scrap began to ease up her breaths, looking at one of the bodies she trotted over, and fetched a pistol from his holster. I think a shotgun is too much for me right now, Scrap said. Hey, someone shouted, a series of rough knocks on the door. I heard one of you idiots shoot. The door opened to reveal a slaver stallion. If any of you, he began, stopping once he saw the carnage His eyes turned to Vena. Oh, shit. Vena skewered the slaver's throat with her talons in an instant. He fell to the floor with a gurgle. See what I mean? Vena spat at the dead slaver before she chuckled. Come on. Vena stepped out of the room, with Scrap following behind, tiptoeing round the fresh corpse into the hallway as the two walked through it. Scrap looked into Vena's hood. Her eyes were bloodshot, her beak began to contort into a grin as wide as it would allow, and that her talons of her right hand tapped rapidly at Cava's handle. It would be a lie to say that Scrap wasn't unnerved. She merely shook her head, though, as a lump formed in her throat. They reached the end of the hall. Scrap peeked out into the main lobby, its bookshelves and tables long since emptied. She noticed around 5 slavers on the main floor. One leaned against the wall nearest them, another sat near the dormant escalators on the left, and a third near the entrance on the right. The last 2 were standing in a corner of the room by a cluster of tables. Scrap recognized one of them, a unicorn, a dark blue leather barding, the edge of his mane receding around his horn, the shape of his jaw and the narrow beady squint of his eyes hit her like a punch to the gut. Trim, Scrap muttered with a sneer. He's their leader. She pointed with a hoof. Vena noticed and nodded. Trim was speaking to the last slaver present, a meek unicorn sitting at one of the tables. Vena drew out Cava and prepared to walk into the lobby. Wait, Scrap whispered to Vena. You're just going out in the open? Vena ignored the question and charged towards the slaver near the bookcase. The slaver noticed too late when Vena's bat swung at the slaver's head. The sound of crushing metal and wood echoed through the hall and made Trim fall quiet. The other slavers and Trim pulled out their firearms and began to shoot, though Scrap noticed one meek slaver near Trim hid away behind the counter. Vena dodged the torrent of lead directed at her and flew across the lobby, as bullets left a trail of holes in the walls and ceiling. Scrap looked around for a better position for herself. It was not until Vena landed on the slaver near the escalator that Scrap decided to take cover behind a large flower pot full of nothing but centuries-old dirt. There were only 2 slavers left, but each was firing at Vena. Scrap, seeing that she could take advantage of this, aimed her pistol at one slaver near the entrance and fired. The bullet grazed the slaver's shoulder, and she grit her teeth hard enough that it stopped her from firing. Vena took the opportunity and slammed Cava against the slaver's neck. Are you fucking me? Trim shouted as he kept shooting with his SMG. Scrap noticed the lead slaver looking behind. Don't just hide there, you piece of shit, do something! Vena took Trim's distraction to advantage, finally flying over and ripping out the SMG from his telekinetic grasp. Trim tried to reach out for a sidearm, but Vena intercepted him and pinned him to the nearest table. With no other slavers present, Scrap began to search each body for some keys, but found no luck. Scrap turned to Vena, her claws piercing hard into Trim's skin to draw blood. You! Trim shouted before Vena slammed his head against the table. Vena laughed as she kept up her assault. Vena, Scrap shouted, does he have the keys? Vena ignored the question and stabbed Trim's shoulder, causing him to yell. Scrap turned away from the scene before Vena used her talons of her other hand to stab into Trim's throat. Scrap scanned the rest of the room, thinking, wait, there was another slaver here, didn't he? She trotted over to the coffee shop, ignoring Trim's pleas for mercy, and looked over by the stand. There she could see a cowering unicorn who first froze upon seeing Scrap, and then raised his forehooves. Scrap's body trembled as she stepped closer to the last slaver. The keys to the cages, where are they? Scrap demanded, was only met with silence. She grit her teeth. Where are they? The slaver just gave her an empty stare. Scrap raised a hoof in the air before stomping on the slaver's face, though it barely made the slaver flinch. Where are they? She shouted and struck again, this time applying more force. Still, the slaver made no sound and merely balled up as Scrap pounded him with a barrage of stomps. Speak! She yelled again, landing a strike against the slaver. Scrap panted as she raised her hoof again with the intention of striking again. She hesitated, her hoof frozen in midair. She took a deep breath. She slowly brought her hoof back down to the floor and simply stared at the slaver. Cactus flower? The slaver coughed. What? Cactus flower. Make sure she's all right, he said before he laid his head against the floor. His tail flicked and landed on his body, pointing over to a pocket on the right side of his barding. Take it. Scrap shook herself before reaching into the pocket and taking out the key ring. She looked over at the slaver and trotted away. She glanced back at the table where Vena had been torturing Trim and gagged upon seeing his remains. Shaking her head, Scrap looked at the front entrance, seeing Vena leaning against the wall laughing. So, Vena said mid-laugh, is that all of them? Scrap shook her head. There's one behind the counter over there. Scrap gestured towards where the last slaver was, but he's not fighting back. Otherwise, I think that's all of them. You saved him for me? Vena snorted as she walked over to the counter. Well, not really. I just didn't know what to do with... Scrap was interrupted by the loud bang of Vena's weapon. The weapon raised Cava into the air once more and brought it down on who Scrap could only assume was the last slaver. Vena kept up her assault. Soon, Cava's clangs were mixed with the sound of bones breaking. Scrap's pupils shrunk as she stood there watching the scene unfold. The filly's body trembled as her breathing quickened. Silence filled the air, followed by Vena's laugh as she walked away from her carnage. She came face to face with Scrap. Scrap forced a cough and just took a few more breaths before speaking to Vena, saying, Well, we'd better go save the slaves. I know where they are. Vena nodded at Scrap and followed the teenager as she trotted towards the dormant escalator. They made it halfway up before Scrap turned around, looking Vena in the eye. Did you really need to kill him? Scrap asked. Vena shrugged, saying, I felt like it. Scrap bit her lip and turned around, resuming her trot. You really want to save them? Vena blurted behind Scrap. Of course I do. Scrap replied. Vena's eyes narrowed as she said, Of course you do. I can't believe he came back, a mustached earth pony stallion said from inside his cage. Scrap grunted as she placed the key after key into the lock, while all the while other slaves stared at her expectantly. Couldn't leave you here, she said with her keys in her mouth. Even without Vena, I would have found some way to free you all. The stallion glanced over to see Vena leaning against the railing close by. She stared ominously towards the slaves. She gave a nervous smile and said, he gave a nervous smile and said, Quite an interesting friend you ran into. Yeah, she saved my life. Scrap laughed nervously. The last key turned smoothly and the cage door swung open. So, after this, would you... Well, I'd like to travel with you, but after that attack, I'm afraid I don't have a caravan no more, the stallion said, cutting her off. Once the cage door was opened, he immediately trotted down the escalator. Scrap gave a solemn sigh. She glanced back to Vena again, who remained silent. Scrap trotted over to another cage to unlock and took notice of the yellow-green earth pony mare. Scrap knew that the mare before her wasn't part of the caravan she traveled with. Seeing the slave's cutie mark, a cactus, Scrap coughed a bit before speaking to the slave. Cactus flower? Yes? Cactus asked and blinked as her body shook. I just want to know if you're doing all right, Scrap said as she forced her smile and went over to fit the key into the cage lock. How did you know my name? Cactus asked, narrowing her eyes at Scrap. Well, one of the slavers asked me to see if you were all right. Where is he? Who? Grease. One of them was named Grease. Where is he? Scrap paused as she tried to think of the right words to say. I killed him, Vena finally spoke. You... Cactus seethed through her teeth. You killed him? Vena, Scrap whispered, dropping the keys. She looked over to Vena. You really shouldn't. Vena merely shrugged, asking, would she care? Why would I? Why would I care? Cactus slammed against the cage bars. Grease hated being a slaver. He was even going to buy me before leaving this shithole. Vena chuckled, but Scrap could see through her hood that the Griffin was sneering at Cactus. You think it's funny? He was all I had to look forward to once I was free. You did at least give him a. Did you at least have a good excuse for killing him? Was he fighting back? Ma'am? Scrap said as she shivered and took a long breath. We're sorry. We couldn't have known. He didn't fight back, Vena coughed and sneered at Cactus. And if he wasn't fighting, he wanted to die. Blame him. Cactus froze for a while before slowly lowering herself to the floor, tears flowing down her face. Scrap shook as she looked between Cactus and Vena and gulped, but turned to Vena and with a sad look, saying, Vena, you're going too far. I don't care, Vena snorted and spat towards Cactus's cage. If she wanted to keep her slaver cult toy alive, then she should have fought back and escaped with him before we arrived. She didn't. But she wasn't in a position to fight back, Scrap whispered to Vena. Just like I was before you. You fought back, Vena retorted. That's what makes you better than her. Scrap took a deep breath and looked Vena square in the eyes with false bravado. Then you could go out and wait for me, Scrap asked. Vena laughed and brought a claw to her face. Once she calmed down and grunted, she walked over to the escalator. Fine, Vena said. I'd leave her, but I'll wait until you're done. Scrap sighed in relief. Cactus, who had been tightly hugging herself, gave a weak forced smirk before glaring at Vena and saying, Maybe if you were a slave who had nothing to look forward to once she was free, then maybe you'd know what it was like being told that you deserved it. Vena stiffened and became silent. Scrap could see Vena's eyes twitching under her hood. The Griffin slowly brought a claw to Cava's handle. I deserved it, Vena muttered. I deserve it? Her hyena-like laugh began softly. I deserve it. Her laugh grew louder. I deserve it. Her grip tightened. I deserved it, she shouted. Scrap stepped back with her wide eyes. Vena! Vena turned to Scrap and then looked away where the filly had dropped the keys. I don't deserve it, Vena said as she reached down to pick the keys, approaching the cage. I won't deserve it. Vena jammed key after key to see which one would fit. Cactus pounced and scampered to the opposite end of her cage. The other slaves followed suit, none daring to protest. Stop it, Scrap shouted, taking a pistol and aiming at Vena. You need to stop it right now, Vena. Vena turned around, eyes wide, only to narrow quickly at Scrap. A burst of wild laughter escaped her throat. What are you doing? Vena managed to ask. It came out breathless and hoarse through her laughs. I thought you were better than this, Scrap shouted, sweat flowing from her forehead. I am better, Vena said, and took a hold of Cava's handle. You've seen what happened to them. So you really think you stand a chance? Scrap shook her head, tears falling down her face. Her breaths became heavy, but she still kept her aim steady at Vena. No, but at least I'll fight, Scrap countered. That's all that matters. The room fell silent. Sans the nervous crying. Sans the nervous? Sounds of nervous crying coming from Cactus. That's thrown my game off there. Scrap trembled as she attempted to keep her show of courage. Vena kept still, very menacing at Scrap. Eventually Vena let go of her grip on Cava. Her eyes softened at the still shivering Scrap and turned back towards the cage to give Cactus one last sneer before turning again, and this time walking over to the escalator. Scrap said nothing as she watched Vena leave. She kept her pistol aimed at Vena, but soon relaxed her posture when the Griffin began to head downstairs. You said I was awesome, that you wanted to be like me. Vena turned her head, revealing a tired look on her face. You lied. A soft wind blew past Vena's cloak. She sat behind a dead tree miles from the bookstore. She had been staring at the building for long while now. All Vena could hear was the wind and her own heartbeat. Vena laughed and she put a hand to her beak and shuddered as her yip became mixed with a hiccup. When she eventually calmed down, she took her hand away from her face and looked back at the bookstore with dry, tired eyes. Vena stood up and began to march towards the bookstore. She stopped herself after a few steps and narrowed her eyes at the building. She collapsed to the ground, yipping out of control as she heaved and thrashed. She calmed down once again and looked up, back towards the bookstore. Her eyes narrowed and her body shook once more. She bolted back up, her wings flapping before turning around to fly away from the building. Her laugh echoed throughout the sky as she flew further, leaving behind only silence. And that was Vena Cava by The Wandering Zebra. That was something, yeah. Not gonna lie, that was pretty edgy as the story goes. Wouldn't you say, BG?
Yeah, I would agree. Still, it's quite nice for a first.
Well, yeah. Wow, indeed. I don't believe there'll be any more stories for tonight. I think I've had my fair share of edge soup tonight. So, this has been Post Apoc Horse Talk with your hosts BG and me, Galantagius. And until next time, you know how it's supposed to go. You have a lovely evening, lads. And that'll
Everybody
be all
take care.
tonight.